Hello, welcome back. In this session, we're going to be looking at question 17 of the business analysis sample paper. So let's read it and see what we can get from this question. It says, Rishi has been analyzing a business activity model created for a profitable business called Red Nose Novelties. Rishi concludes that the staff have all the skills needed, the marketing of the product is effective, product development is effective although slow, the tools used for market analysis are good but not market leading for long-term trends. Now here's the instructions. In categorizing the activities within the business activity model, which of the following categories should he use? Okay. So first of all, we can see that the question, in terms of a context, is asking about business activity models. So that is one thought that or technique that we need to bring into this. Let's see if there's anything else that is required. So we can also see within the instructions, it says categorizing the activities within the business activity model. Okay, so first off, if we think back to our studies and we think about categorizing business activity model activities, there are three categories. So in terms of the context, we may be conducting various activities when we are using business activity models. So we know that business activity models are primarily utilized to identify various stakeholder perspectives on a particular organization. So the organization may then go to various stakeholders across the business and then ask them, what activities does the business do? They will then place all of these categories in a flow or on the business activity model. So using all the different 5 categories of activities themselves. So it'll go through all of these activities, the doing, the planning, the enabling, controlling and monitoring. So once that's been specified, we may then need to gain a consensus. So we'll take all of these different business activity models and we'll formulate one consensus model. So we'll bring these stakeholders together and we'll say, look, we can see you've done that. Why have you done that? And you've done this. Should they be joined here? Should that be eliminated? And eventually we'll get a consensus model that everyone agrees on. So it's a shared perspective of what the business should look like. So they say that this is the process. These are all the activities in the business that should be taking place for it to be an optimal business. Once we've done that, we then have established a view of the target state of the organization. So we can use it to establish this target state and work towards this in terms of improving the business or implementing a solution. Now, we may need a few other models in order to really knuckle down and establish what this target state is. We may need business capability models, may need target operating models. But what we may also need to do is carry out gap analysis. So gap analysis will allow us to define the gap between the current state and the target state and what needs to change between these two states. This will then allow us to find out what needs to be done. So what specific projects need to be put in place? What specific actions need to take place in order to transition from this current state to this future state where this consensus model is being represented for this target state? And for us to carry out gap analysis, we may then use a business activity model, a consensus business activity model, to establish that if this particular activity is there, or this particular activity is there, or this process needs to change, or this particular activity wasn't there before, we then can establish, we can think about this and say, how are we going to change this business? So we can use this business activity model for our gap analysis process. So gap analysis also has its own formal process that we can follow, and we can go through all the stages, identification and analysis and what have you, and then eventually get to a point where we'll know what to do to transition to this new organizational state, this perceived view of the target future state. And then we will then be able to implement these solutions and such effectively. Okay, so when we are carrying out this gap analysis process, we need to examine these activities on the business activity model. So we'll look at all of these items, and we'll then identify the gaps or the areas of improvement that need to be done from an activity perspective. It allows us to think about the activities and what is taking place in the organization. So when we are inspecting and evaluating these activities against the current situation, because we need to look at what we are currently doing and look at how it needs to change, we can actually categorize all the activities that are in our business activity model. So we need to do this. We need to categorize them, not from the perspective of the 5 different activity types, those planning, or rather the doing, enabling, planning, monitoring, and controlling. That would have been that activity categorization would have been done during the creation of the business activity model. But now we need to look at these activities that are already on the business activity model during this gap analysis process, and we need to then categorize them in terms of a type of priority. So which activities are already there? So maybe there are some particular activities that were in the organization before that need to be brought forward into this new current state. So in that case, there's not much that probably needs to be done to those activities, unless they have some dependencies on other activities that may affect them. But then there may be some activities that are changed, and there may be some activities on this new business activity model that are completely new. Or the process between these activities, the dependencies may have completely changed. So we may then need to know which of these activities on the business activity model requires more information. And this is why we need to categorize them to allow us to know which of these activities need more attention. And what we can do is we can use these generic categorization methods. So there's 3 categories that we can place these activities into. And this is all from your textbooks, your guidebooks, and your studies. So this is thinking back, this should have been taught to you in your studies. So the 3 categories within this process of categorizing them is operating satisfactory, no immediate attention. So in this case, if we have an activity and it's operating as it should, we pretty much don't need to do anything to it. The second category that we may take our activities from our business activity model and put them into the second category is some issues to be addressed, action required. So in this case, we need to give it some attention, and we need to do some actions within there to change it a bit in order for us to move towards this target operating state. Then the third one is not in place, urgent attention required. So in this case, the activity may not even exist, or it may need to completely be overhauled. So we need to address it. We need to focus and pay most of our attention on those activities in order to get the organization transition to this other state. So can you see that by categorizing them into these 3 different categories, we ultimately prioritizing our activities, and we allowing ourselves to know what we need to focus on, which activities on this model should we be focusing on to create projects and apply changes to these particular areas of the business. There's another way that we can prioritize these activities in terms of how important they are or what attention needs to be given to them, and that is through the RAG assessment. So that's the red, amber, green. If it's green, then it's good. Not much should be done to it. If it's amber, we need to look at it, but maybe there's not too much that needs to be done. Just a little bit of attention needs to be given to it. Then if it's red, it means that there's a problem there, or there's a lot of attention that needs to be given to it. So we can, even if you wanted to, you are creating some graphical representation of your model within this IT tool, such as a graphic design tool or Miro or any of these online modeling tools that business analysts use. You can actually, within your business activity model, you can take those bubbles, those activities in their bubbles, and you can actually color code them. You can color them green, amber, and red. But in the context of this particular question, we're using the other categorization, and that's the operating satisfactory. Nothing really needs to be done about it. Some issues to be addressed. There is some action required. And the third one is not in place, urgent attention required. So once we've categorized these things, we can then we can think about these activities within the original context of the organization and its objectives. And we can set priorities on these things, and we can start bringing them into projects and presenting solutions to stakeholders in the business. And once they've been identified, we can give them more attention and look at them in more detail, so that these activities of what are to be done. So the activities, what is going to be done in this particular organization, can now change to the thought process of how is it going to be done? How is the organization going to carry out these activities, and how are we going to transition to this point where these activities are being done in the right way? So that's given us a lot of context in terms of the categorization of activities in a business activity model, maybe during a gap analysis process. Now, having this knowledge, let's now look at this question again. So it says, Rishi has been analyzing a business activity model created for a profitable business, Red Nose Novelties. So already we can see here that it's indicating that the business is profitable. So is there anything that really needs to be changed in this business? And Rishi is potentially the business analyst or consultant, and they're looking at the business activity model. So you can see contextually from what I've described before, this is all taking place. And through her analysis of this business activity model, these 4 statements here is what she's thought about. This is what she's concluded. This is what she's gathered. It says the staff have all the skills needed. Great. So she's looked at this model, may have been a consensus model, and it says that everyone in the organization, all the staff that are working there, have all the skills that are required for this particular business activity model. The marketing of the product is effective. It's a positive thing. That's great. Nothing needs to change. Product development is effective, although slow. Okay, so it's still pretty good. The tools used for market analysis are good, but not market leading for long-term trends. Okay, so if we think about these 4 statements here, it's giving us a context. Let me just look at so it's giving us a context, and the instructions here, in this instruction statement, it says, in categorizing the activities within the business activity model, which of the following categories should he use? So as I've explained before, we have these categories. We need to categorize them after the business activity or during the analysis of the business activity model. And you can see here that we have A, B, C, and D. And these are one of 3 of the categories that we have mentioned. So we have operating satisfactory, no immediate action, and some issues may be addressed, action required. So we've got 2 of those categories that are 2 of the 3 categories that I was speaking about earlier. So they're not using a RAG assessment here, they're rather using those 3 categories. B, operating satisfactory, no immediate action. Operating satisfactorily, no immediate action, and not in place, urgent consideration. Then D, some issues to be addressed, action required, and not in place, urgent consideration. So we have to think about the context of this organization here and define what are the best categories for these particular things here. And if we read through this here, we can see that 2 of these 4 statements are indicating that the organization is operating as it is. So nothing needs to be done to those particular activities. The staff have all the skills needed. Do we need to do anything? No. The marketing of the product is effective. Do we need to do anything to these activities on the BAM? No, we don't. So that means that the operating satisfactorily, no immediate action is one of the categories that we are categorizing these statements in. Now, what else? What other category are we going to be using here? Are we going to be using the not in place urgent consideration? So it's the red, it's a big problem that we need to pay a lot of attention to. Or are we going to be using the middle more amber category where it's about there are some issues that need to be addressed and there is some action required. So if it says product development is effective, although slow. So it's saying it's effective, it's good enough, but it's slow. So that means that do we need a huge amount of detail and action into that particular activity? No, we don't. There's just a few little issues and we just need some action. So that's on the 3rd statement. Now, already we have our answer because we know that in each of these 4 options, there's only 2 categories. And in A, I can see that we have operating satisfactorily, no immediate action, and some issues to be addressed, action required. I already know that A is the correct answer. But let's just continue and look at this 4th statement here. The tools used for market analysis are good enough, but not market leading for long-term trends. So once again, this is not some crazy issue or some complete overhaul. They're saying that we've got a massive problem with this activity or it requires a massive amount of attention. Maybe some huge project needs to take place in order to change everything. It's not the case. It's saying the tools that are used for market analysis are good. It's just saying they are not market leading for long-term trends. So that is something that may need to take place. Just some action is required for this. So once again, it falls into the some issues to be addressed, action required. So we have 2 at the top, which are operating satisfactorily, no immediate action. And the 2 at the bottom, the 3rd and the 4th statements in that list, is some issues to be addressed and action required. So A is the correct answer here. I hope that clarifies this type of question and the reasoning behind answering a question such as this, and a little bit more insight into business activity models, gap analysis, and the categorization of these activities when we're in the evaluation stage, when we're analyzing the organization within gap analysis to think about the target state. Not in the creation of the BAM where we are categorizing the activities in terms of what particular types of activities they are, the doing, the enabling, the planning, monitoring and controlling. That's something that takes place when we are creating the BAM. So, I hope to see you in the next question. Goodbye.